Hello, Mary Hudson. How are you doing?
Well, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I am Glenn Loury. This is The Glenn Show at bloggingheads.tv. I'm a professor at Brown University and a faculty affiliate of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, which sponsors The Glenn Show. And I'm with Mary Hudson, who is a former public school teacher in the city of New York and the author of a piece that was published at Quillette.com, the provocative and very interesting dynamic website. The piece was called Public Education's Dirty Secret. I was very much stimulated by it and decided that it would be a good idea to talk with Mary here at the Glenn Show about her thoughts on public education or education more generally in the United States. So thank you very much, Mary.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I'm a fan of your show.
Thanks. I'm glad to hear that. Listen, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience by talking about your background in education and also about this piece? I have some questions that I want to ask you, stimulated by reading your piece, but why don't you just introduce us here a little bit to the topic by telling us, who you are and public education's dirty secret. That doesn't sound like a compliment, so I'm curious to know what you're getting at there. Yeah.
Well, I've taught from most of my professional life, both in Europe and in the United States. Foreign languages is my field of specialty, in which I've been trained and which I really enjoy doing. It was my vocation, but I'm also a translator. And I came to the public education system when I was realizing that my finances were a little bit precarious. My husband was a freelance writer, and he wanted me to remain in academia when I got my PhD. But I said, no, I need more financial stability. So I joined the public education system.
Wait a minute, you have a PhD?
In French literature, yes.
I see. And you were teaching high school, I assume, in New York City public schools.
Well, I also taught at Hunter College for a few years. I taught at the new school as an adjunct. I was an adjunct assistant professor at NYU, and 3 years at Hunter College. And then when I finished my PhD, that job disappeared. But I remained as an adjunct at the new school and NYU.
And what I find interesting is that you saw more financial stability in the New York City public school system than you saw trying to find a job in academia.
Oh, of course. I think over 60% of United States professors are field hands in the fields of academia. I mean, we're adjuncts. We were hired hands. They are hired hands. And it's very poorly paid with no advantages,
Fringe benefits.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Fringe benefits. I think that's what we tenured professors call it.
Yes, that was the word I was looking for. And
no problem. No, there is a little bit of a class hierarchy going on in the industry of higher education. I agree with you 100%.
So
but anyway,
it was too
go
precarious
on.
Financially.
Okay, so you got your PhD. You took up employment in New York City public schools at the end of the day.
Yes, knowing that it was probably a rough ride, but I didn't understand quite how bad it would be or why. And I found out both, I think, to some extent, as much as any intelligent observer of good faith can find out the truth.
Okay.
But much to my dismay, nobody wanted to hear it.
Yeah, I want to hear about what you think the truth is and how it is that people reacted to it. But in your comment to me before we started recording, the first thing at the top of your list is how to continue public conversation. And I'm wondering what you mean by that.
Well,
public conversation on this issue of education. Education's dirty little secret.
Yeah, I think American society and world society is in such flux at the moment because, frankly, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, to me, do not belong in the 21st century. So people are, I hope, are finally realizing we have to look more closely at what the problems are and stop relying on the old facile explanations of what went wrong. It's not a vague thing about racism. It's not a vague thing. It's actual day-to-day living. And the problems that are by now so deeply rooted in the public education system in America go back to the 1960s. And I hate to say it, but it seems to me that it was the Johnson-era's Great Society legislation that led to a very wrong path, especially for our disadvantaged, our African-American students.
You're blaming the Great Society for the problems in American education. I want to know what you think those problems are, but
legislation,
maybe we should start there.
Basically, legislation that takes power away from the teacher to organize his or her own classroom and puts the power into the hands of students, because we have anti-discrimination laws. Because in context in inner city schools, the majority of students who would be discriminated against would have a different color skin. In my schools, they all have the same colors as a rule.
Hold on a minute. Let me just ask you, because I'm not clear on the role that race is playing in the larger question of American public education. Your background in New York City will have you in, I assume, a minority school district. But do you think education in America is healthy otherwise? Is it healthy in Eastern Kentucky or in West Virginia or in...
Probably not. Probably not.
And do you think that those problems are similar to the problems of the inner city? Because you're saying civil rights laws and giving students, protecting them from discrimination. And that strikes me as not obviously the central phenomenon going on in an educational process.
Well, I think race is incidental in a sense to the American political scene. But for instance, I lived in Northern Ireland, where my husband was from a ghetto. His family, some of them remained in the ghetto. Sorry to use the word, but it's what seems to me the best word to use it.
It's just a word.
To use in this case, sorry?
I say it's just a word. It's probably descriptive of the social circumstance you're pointing to. Yes,
and I noticed that although the color of the skin of the people who were ghettoized was different, they had exactly the same problems.
Okay, let's talk about those problems. What's wrong? What's the dirty secret?
The dirty secret is that the education system is pretending to educate children when they are not.
Okay.
That's the dirty secret. They cannot, it's very difficult to educate children when you don't have a disciplined, calm environment. And the laws we work under have made it impossible to have that calm, disciplined environment in many classroom situations. I always think of when there's a critical mass of children who believe that less is expected of them because of whatever situation they were born into, is whether it's the color of their skin, the religion as it was in Northern Ireland, etc. They had nothing to do with the family they were born into. But because of what they look like or what they sound like or what community they come from, with which they have nothing to do, less is expected of them. In reality, that's what happens. And they know that. And they resent it. And they say, all right, you expect less of me? I'll show you. Yeah, you won't get anything at all. And they're only children. Children always push limits. And the problem with the education system in America is the limits have to come from outside the school, not within the school. And that is not the parents' job. It is not the community's job. It is the educator's job to educate. And the education system has failed to provide calm, disciplined environments in which students study and learn and develop their intellects.
Okay, I hear two indictments here broadly, and I'd like you to correct me or fill in if this is not what you're getting at. One of them has to do with expectations, and the other has to do with order. The problem that I think you're identifying with respect to expectations is that disadvantaged kids who might be identified by race or class, depending on the social context, are being patronized in a way. They're not learning, and the system is accepting that they're not learning because it basically doesn't expect them to learn. And
it's afraid to be charged with discrimination.
Okay.
Because there are very real laws in effect.
Well, hold on now, because I think that relates to the order problem. The expectations problem is, you say, the expectations problem is about the psychology of the system vis-a-vis these kids and seeing them as, somehow incapable of learning, or it's quite okay if they don't learn because after all, they're the victims or whatever. This is the expectations. The discipline problem, it seems to me, is where rules and regulations come in, because then you can't get disruptive kids out of the classroom, or the system kind of gives the kids all the power in the conflict between the student and teacher. Yes. And that might be related to race in the United States, because civil rights, equal treatment, non-discrimination regulations might somehow make it more difficult to maintain order in the classroom. But in any case, yes. Do I get this broadly right?
Yes, I believe you do.
The people in charge don't think these kids really can learn in the first place, and the kids know it and resent it. But secondly, the kids are acting out, and the system doesn't give the teacher enough discretion to be able to handle the order problem in the classroom.
I don't know how many people consciously believe that they are not capable, the students, but they act as if they do, which comes to the same thing. But the worst thing is that they pass children along who are not ready for the next stage because they are allowed to waste their time in the classroom. And this doesn't happen in more middle-class communities or communities of whatever color. I know I met a lot of Caribbean parents when I was working in one of the schools I worked at, and they came from systems where they imposed order in the classroom, all right, as they did in the home. So it really, raciness to me is incidental, especially after I saw that so clearly in Northern Ireland, where everybody was pasty white.
Let me push back on that a little bit in the following sense. I grant you that race is not essential, but in a given historical situation, it might end up being important. And that's because of the way that people identify.
Absolutely.
So these kids that you might have been encountering, and I want you to tell some of your war stories about things that you experienced, but these kids that you might have been encountering in New York City public schools come into the institution with a certain sense of who they are and how they relate to other things that are going on. And in America, that might have a lot to do with their race.
Yes, I agree with you there. But not all children come with those ideas and expectations. Sure. I would say that the majority of these children come perfectly prepared to learn, come from perfectly, okay families. The parents did their jobs, or the mothers or whatever. Kids came to the school well fed, clean, well groomed. It's not the parents' job to formally educate children. It's the educator's job. So I agree with you. In the context in which I worked, race was a factor.
Yeah, okay, that's all I was trying to establish.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your experiences teaching in New York City public schools that have brought you to this distressing conclusion. Institutions not working, kids not learning, but they're being moved along nonetheless. The system accepts the fact that they're not learning because of basically a soft bigotry of low expectations. The kids resented their behavior in class, not perhaps every one of them, but many of them is disruptive and inconsistent with learning. I want to know how you came to feel and know these things.
I could see that kids were bullied into, for instance, not bringing textbooks home. The kids never did homework because they, not only to me, but to other teachers, if I bring book bags out of the school, I'm beat up. This was told to many, many teachers, and they didn't do homework. A lot of kids didn't do a lot. At one point in the school, the first school I was at, which was the worst, I tried to move the kids around. The kids I could see who wanted to learn something. And I have this way of teaching. I wasn't dealing with them in their native language, my native language. I was dealing with them in French, with methods that really worked very well, but basically through French. So at one point, after a few months, I said, okay, I know the kids who want to learn something. I put them all up front near me. I was reported to the principal, and she slapped my hand for that, figuratively, of course. I was not allowed to separate off the kids in the classroom from those who really wanted to learn.
How did you know who wanted to learn and who didn't want to learn? I'm sorry, I know that sounds naive, but...
Well, I'm a seasoned teacher. I taught for many years, and you could tell the kids who paid attention and would respond.
So somebody's going to say...
I tried to teach.
Somebody's going to say, if a kid is sullen and disinterested and distracted, and the teacher doesn't know how to deal with that, forgive me, I'm not second guessing you, I'm just telling you what I know some people are going to say, then that's on the teacher. You can't take the sullen kid and put him in the back of the class and talk to the other kids. It's your job to get him engaged. No, maybe a difficult job, but it's your job.
Well, good luck to you if you can do it. But in every single classroom, it was general. It wasn't only my classroom. It happened to other teachers as well. The kids came for their social life, not to mention, a few other things. But
I'm sorry. What do you mean? I just don't know what you're alluding to.
For instance, somebody said to me, "Well, so big deal. They're because you're not allowed to have suspension." In-house suspension after a rigmarole you have to go through was the only kind of suspension allowed. But somebody said, well, so what if they leave school for a day or two? I said, they hate leaving school. They love coming to school, the kids. It's their whole social life. But believe me, the results are there. We see it at every level, unfortunately. This is what I lived for 4 years I was in bad schools, and for 5 years I was at Brooklyn Tech. So it was a different kettle of fish.
Okay, hold on. Let's get to that. Let's get to that. But I want to know a little bit more about the social engagement of kids in the school. Are you saying these are, at least at the high school level, teenagers who are interested, boys in finding girls and stuff like that? Sure. Are you saying that they're cliques or, they're gangs or something and people are coming in?
Well, there probably were gangs at my school. It was an enormous school, Washington Irving. And they did have one section where they had very, they called it Rikers Island Prep. But they were kind of cordoned off from the rest of the kids. But, that was a joke, of course. However, we did have kids that were...
Not funny.
No, I know.
Because what does it say about expectations? It says that the institution engaging these kids has pretty much already decided that they're headed to Rikers Island.
Well, some of them actually were from there, had been there already. But I don't. Teachers were kept pretty much in the dark about these things, so I can't really talk about hard facts.
Okay, and this cultural practice of bullying kids into not carrying books home from school and stuff like that. What's up with that? You say that was widespread, that other teachers also commented on it, that kids would talk to teachers complaining about the fact that they couldn't do homework because their peers wouldn't allow them safe passage? Yes.
In the article I mentioned, that happened all the time. Well, that's what we were told. Maybe they were inventing an excuse. I don't know, but the fact is they didn't do the homework. So it might as well have been true. One of the things that really struck me was a lovely teacher of history. And, she managed to keep order like the rest of us who survived. But two girls were talking, and she asked one of them to please pay attention. And she said, I don't talk to teachers. We're like, we don't talk to teachers. We were despised as a rule. But if you went on a day trip with the kids, they were perfectly normal. It was in the classroom. It's so odd. There was, and I said there was an ethos of rejection. That's how I explained it to myself. There's an ethos that's common in that school and in lots of others, I'm sure, where you reject white education. it was never said it was white education, but you got the feeling that that was it.
Okay. So I see institutional problems with not being able to maintain discipline where the background legal environment might be contributing to that. And I see another kind of institutional problem in expectations and a willingness to accept outcomes that ought not to be acceptable. But I seem also to be hearing you evidence of cultural problems in the populations that were coming into the New York City public schools. Where does this practice amongst the peers of sanctioning each other for engagement with the institution come from? Where are the parents in this story? What's happening outside of the 6 or 8 hours a day that the kid is in the school building that then redounds to the detriment of the educational enterprise when the kid comes back into the building? Things like that. Did you ever visit the home of any of your students?
No. And we didn't in Washington Irving. Sorry?
I said that's not done?
No, it's not done. It would probably be forbidden, in fact. I don't know. But I can tell you that at Washington Irving, very few parents came to parent-teachers night. And as far as I know, I don't know anything about the parent-teachers organization, which was probably weak. But I don't know about the culture they came from. There was a whole range, I'm sure. But the ethos of the school was an ethos of rejection amongst the students. Not at Brooklyn Tech.
Were there exceptions? Students whom you had personal relationships with who would come to you for advice, maybe even surreptitiously, wanting to find a connection and develop a relationship? In my experience, I don't recall it happening. Wow. And you were there
it's not a small community. These are huge New York City schools.
Okay.
Kids came from all over the place. You know, I didn't live in a little suburban town where you might know the parents and so forth.
I see.
These are enormous New York City public schools, and I don't know if maybe other teachers. But again, I was also speaking to them in a foreign language, so it wasn't easy for me to develop personal relationships with the kids.
Okay, now,
it was my job not to speak to them in English.
I want to be clear on this, just as a side note. You're teaching French to high school students, and you're conducting the entire session en français.
Well, en français, I tried, but I didn't. I had to keep order in English.
Yeah, I guess if they don't understand you in French.
Yeah.
Were there non-white teachers in your experience,
sure.
Your colleagues? No, I mean to say, were there non-white teachers who were more effective at being able to overcome some of these obstacles, whose attitude toward the students was discernibly different, who were less content to accept that these students were being moved along without learning, who had healthier somehow relationships of authority, lines of authority and control between themselves and the students, or did it matter? Were the kids just as contemptuous of the black teachers as of the white teachers, and so on?
As a rule, yeah. As a rule, I would say, if you were, young, black, and beautiful, you had a bit of an edge. And I spoke about this wonderful man whose name I've forgotten from Minnesota, who had just a great way with the kids, and he got them to do that fashion show every year. But no, as a rule, I don't think black teachers had any more success with the kids than the white teachers. We represented a system to them, and they didn't want anything to do with that system. I can't blame them for that. I mean, I used to say to them, listen, kids, the system stinks, but it's the only show in town. Please do not destroy your chances for a better life. The overwhelming pressure on them was not to study. And the results I don't know about Washington Irving. I tended to teach freshmen and sophomores. So I didn't see the higher levels. Although when I was at the last school, the first school, it was a new school, so it was their third year. So I dealt with juniors when I proctored the SAT exam and so forth. But I just, in those enormous schools like that, you don't get to know a lot of, what happens in the end. I just know that kids graduated who certainly failed my classes. But I don't think the grades we handed in were the grades that I have no proof of that, but circumstantial evidence would point to that.
I'm sorry, wait a minute, I want to understand this.
The grades we handed in were not the final grades that the students were given. I suspect. I have
You
no
think
proof.
that the administration altered the grades for reporting student performance?
I wouldn't be surprised. I have no proof of that. But I know that kids graduated with a diploma who did not have a 12th grade education.
Well, if official reports are being made contrary to what the teacher has actually assessed, that's fraud. That's just straight up lying.
Yeah, well, to me, it's a fraudulent system based on deceit and lies. And people like me who say, "Hold on, wait a second, we're not well liked by the system. Certainly, the principal hated me."
You say Brooklyn Tech was a lot better.
Yes, students had to be tested in, and I see de Blasio wants to change that now. I think that's insane.
Brooklyn Tech is one of the few exam entrance testing schools that have a very high level of academic performance, and their kids go on to college at a high rate. And some of the others are like, what are some of the other schools in the same class within New York City?
Well, I would count it as maybe third after Stuyvesant and Bronx Science, and then Brooklyn Tech. Although I hear Brooklyn Tech is coming up again.
Now I understand that like a half or 2/3 of the youngsters in New York City who are testing into these schools are Asian. Do I get that number wrong?
When I was there, that probably wasn't the case. I must say I had a lot of very good Asian students. They did the work.
It's a high number. I gather that's one of the reasons why de Blasio and others are contemplating changing the protocols for admission to these schools, because they're not representative of the city's population.
I'm sorry, kids are kids. My father used to say, "We're all God's children." I don't care what ethnic background students come from. I believe in meritocracy. I really don't care. I think it's a scandal that Harvard, the way they used to have quotas against Jews, they now have quotas against Asians. I think that's wrong.
Well, how about this? Suppose I forget about what ethnic group kids are in, and I just look at the different public schools, feeder schools into the high schools around New York City, and I say something like, let the top 2 or 3 kids somehow determined in each district fill up a third of the class, and then cherry pick from the top of the test pool for the rest.
What third are you talking about?
Well, I'm saying, suppose there's 1,000 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I don't know how many districts there are in New York City, but let me say there are 50 public feeder schools or whatever. Let me say there are 50. Suppose we took 3 kids in each feeder school all around all the neighborhoods, some of them very poor, some of them very black, but we took 3 kids, the top 3 kids in each of the 50 feeder schools. That's 150 kids. Then we have 850 seats left, and we fill them up by going to the test score roster and going from the top down, taking the best scoring kids regardless of their ethnic group. By the way, the 150 that we took, 3 from each of the 50 districts, was also regardless of their ethnic group. But in doing it in that way, every part of the city, even the worst schools, would have a few kids who might have the natural talent and the interested parents to be able to cut it in a Bronx High School of Science or Brooklyn Tech.
Well,
I'm just throwing that out because what I'm separating is the goal of having a more access for lower class kids from racial quotas. That's what I'm trying to do.
But But the problem goes down to very early levels. I hear from people who teach kindergarten. I had a sister who tried to teach in the Bronx in elementary school. She lasted about 3 weeks. Those schools have the same problem. So the trouble with de Blasio's plan is have the best kids from all feeder schools in the city.
Oh, is that his plan?
There are no uniform.
His plan. That's his plan?
Yeah, apparently.
Okay.
Every school has different standards. There are no uniform standards throughout the city, and you often, you don't know what the scores are based on. So, no, I really do believe that we have to improve the rigor. The rigor is no longer that necessary, but intellectual rigor, I mean. But you have to improve the standards of reading and maths before they get to high school. Otherwise, they can't do the high school work. So,
but you just told me that it seemed impossible to do that, at least in your experience, because of the chaos in the classroom and the diffidence and hostility of the kids to learning.
Yes.
So it looks like we're giving up.
No, we shouldn't. We can't. All we have to do, we need the political will to change some of the laws. That's all we need. Okay, it's not that simple. All right.
But tell me how you think they should be.
There are probably cultural attitudes that have to change as well, but I don't know about them. I only know about the classroom.
Okay.
I hear and so forth. But
tell me about how you think the laws should be changed.
We should end the laws that say it's discriminatory to send a child outside the classroom. Because I don't believe in corporal punishment, but unless bad behavior is punished, and it will thrive. And there's no effective punishment in the American public school system for disruptive behavior. We are not allowed to even put one child outside the classroom, and we have to go through a whole rigmarole to have them sent to in-house suspension where they're hanging around for a day or two with their, with other kids who are not going to the classroom. But at least they'll be in school, and they can hang out with their friends at lunchtime and so forth, I suppose. I don't really know. But no, it's not an effective punishment. And,
go ahead.
The parents, it seems to me, as I said, it's not the parent's job to give their child a formal education. How many parents can do that? Virtually none. It's the school's job to get the parents on board if they're not. It's not the parents' job. If there's a cultural problem, the school has to admit it and say, okay, this has to change because your kid's going to be sent home. If not, no, the parents have to work this and that. All right, well, they'll find something. They'll put the onus on the student to behave. And if they don't behave, they're sent out of the classroom.
Now,
to protect the education of the other kids.
As you know, there will be a lot of people opposed to what you just said.
I know that, yeah.
What do you think their best argument is, even if it doesn't convince you? What's the best argument against what you just proposed?
The only argument I ever heard is it'd be discriminatory because the kids will be black. They didn't say it so boldly, but I do. Sorry, kids are kids. I don't care if you're green or purple.
So if indeed... So suppose just hypothetically the proportion of kids suspended for bad behavior were to double under your zero tolerance kind of posture. And that meant that, twice as many black kids, and it was a large number. Let's say it was a quarter of the kids. I don't think that's out of line. I don't think that number is out of line based on, the statistics that you can get from the education department and elsewhere about suspension rates. So we got a quarter of the black kids being sent home to empty houses to idle themselves all day. You don't see a problem with that?
Of course, it's a problem, but the problem would get resolved one way or the other, presumably by the parents taking, whatever it takes to get the kids taken care of and to behave themselves and to learn something while they're there. Of course it's a problem, but it seems to me it's less of a problem than letting how many generations by now get by with a really substandard education?
Look, I'm in agreement with you that the status quo is unacceptable. I'm trying to, examine what some possible alternatives might be. And I want to put this question to you. As a woman of many years' experience in classrooms in a big city public school system who knows what those discipline problems are like, those same kids who are talking back to the teacher may well be talking back to or behaving in a surly manner vis-a-vis or being indifferent to the promptings of their own parents.
Yeah.
Being a parent, a single mother, you living in a low-income neighborhood, there are a lot of negative environmental influences on your kids. You're pressed for time. You don't have any money. You're stressed out. You got several kids. I'm not arguing with you. I want you to understand I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to say, I'm trying to find out where a solution might be coming from.
That's a very good question. I don't have the answers. I'm just seeing it from the perspective of a teacher. Now, it seems to me the community can do something. People have churches they go to.
What about early childhood education? What about universal pre-K? Another de Blasio item. What about expanding the footprint of public education?
Parents don't send their kids to school until they're 7. Germany probably have the best. The Germans have. They don't send kids to school for formal education until they're 7 years old.
Those are German
I don't
kids.
see the point of it. Yeah, Germany. They have the most rigorous.
Germany's a different society than the United States. I
know, but still, just because they go to school when they're younger doesn't mean that it helps them. In fact, people are educators. In some of my readings, I've learned that kids don't remember much until they're 6 or 7.
Oh, but I'm not trying to teach them arithmetic. I'm trying to teach them behavior. I'm trying to get them to be able to sit still and be quiet. I'm trying to get them to be respectful, things of that kind. And I'm saying
they can sit still and be quiet. You can get them to sit still to sit still and be quiet. You can do that, but that's not enough. I don't have all the answers, but I do think it's a key problem that has to be solved at a societal level.
I don't want to let you off the hook that easily. I think you correctly identify a very serious problem with public education, big city urban public education, and it's failing the kids. And then the question is what to do about it. You said, on the one hand, the school is there to teach. It's not the parent's responsibility. You say, on the other hand, learning can't happen because the kids come in with attitudes and behaviors that are inconsistent with order. And then when I say what to do about it, you say, well, you should get these disorderly kids out of the classroom and, in effect, let the parents deal with it as they will. And I'm, that doesn't
the parents.
That doesn't sound good enough to me. And then you reject the idea of getting the kids into some kind of developmental framework earlier in life, where I'm proposing that as a way of counteracting the evident inadequacy of their child rearing from the homes that they're coming from. God bless those people. I don't mean them any harm. But if the kid comes in and doesn't respect authority, the parent, it seems to me, hasn't done her job or his before they sent the kid to the public school. So I don't know. It feels to me like you're just throwing your hands up.
Me personally, yes, I suppose you're right. I don't know the answer to that problem, but I think it has to take place in the community. Maybe in the churches, parents have to get together, it seems to me. Parents of minority kids saying, hold on, if we're not going to do anything about this, nobody will. So it seems to me, and I would like to see a coalition of parents and teachers to thrash out these problems, say, okay, listen, this has gone far enough. We must demand that the schools do a lot better job by our kids. What can we do to solve this problem? And so my idea is, if for what it's worth, is to get parents and teachers, first of all, talking about the problem and seeing how they can together come to some sort of answer to improve the education of our disadvantaged kids. I mean, middle class people of whatever color, they're doing fine. But when you have this ethos imposed on kids from wherever it comes from, culture or wherever, it is highly destructive, and the education system is pretending it's not happening. So I think the answer comes from parents and teachers getting together, thrashing out the problems, admitting them, and putting pressure in the long run with maybe the help of the union. The union should have done a lot better, sort of done a job about this. The union should take a role, I believe, in saying, okay, this has gone far enough. We have to solve this problem.
The union should take a role beyond that of representing the teachers' interests financially.
Yes, I think they really should articulate what the problems are.
And they should.
However, I don't hold out much hope of that.
They should take the initiative and try to develop relationships with parent organizations concerned to foster the development of their children.
Yes, parent-teacher
unions and parents.
Well, not the whole union per se, but I think if the union got behind it, parents and teachers getting together saying, okay, the system isn't going to change this. We have to put pressure.
Now, another guest at the Glenn Show some years ago in a discussion about education had a lot to say about charter schools as a potential alternative to the status quo that might work for many if not all of the disadvantaged kids that you're talking about. Where are you on charter schools?
Well, by the way, I really enjoyed the Manhattan Institute conference that you were the keynote speaker at. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I thought it was a groundbreaking discussion.
Thank you. Oh, by the way,
who's the gentleman? Sorry,
his name is Ian Rowe. That's the gentleman running schools in the South Bronx who spoke.
Yes, that's right.
Schools.
Yeah.
I just want everybody to know that they can just Google Manhattan Institute, Glenn Loury, and they can find the proceedings of this conference.
Highly recommended. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Anyway, go on. About charter schools.
I don't know enough about them, and I know that it's a political problem as well as anything else. But I don't think they're the solution. I believe in public education. Now,
these are public.
I don't know, and the charter schools are some sort of weird hybrid. I don't know what exactly they are. They have more control over discipline, I believe, which is probably why they get better results. But I honestly don't know enough about charter schools.
Well,
it is a political tool against public education, and to that extent, I'm not happy about them.
Sure.
But if they get good results with kids, that's if they get better results, and I'm not so sure they do all the time. But
well, it's a mixed bag. They don't always do, but the best of them certainly do. And
I would bet the best of them impose order.
They're not subject to the same political controls or to the same union influence. So some of these rules are not national laws. Some of the rules that you're objecting to that limit the ability.
No, I know.
Yeah. They're not national laws. They're regulations adopted by localities and districts and
right. Yeah. No, you're right.
Bargaining arrangements.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about that either. Certainly, it's very difficult for me to read law text, but I know that we work under a lot of anti-discrimination laws that are counterproductive.
Well, excuse me for interrupting you. What do you think when you hear people lament what they call the school to prison pipeline?
What do the people mean by it?
No, I know what they mean by it. They mean there's a kind of complicity or entailment between the educational institutions and the incarceration institutions, such that the kids are put on a track, as it were, a conveyor belt, and they're being groomed in the schools for a life of control by the state in institutions of confinement. That's what they mean. I know what they mean. Yeah. I'm trying to get at whether or not you buy it in any shape of whatsoever, whether or not there's any complicity in your view. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so let me just stop. What do you think when you hear, does it make you roll your eyes up in your head and you say, oh, it's another left? Well, or do you think there's something?
Frankly, I haven't heard it before, but my gut reaction is to say this sounds a little bit paranoid to me. People muddle through life at wherever they are. I don't care if you're a multi-gazillionaire or you're impoverished. We all muddle through our lives, and I don't think there's a conspiracy to fill up jails with African-American kids. No, I don't know enough about it, but there is a problem with far too many people in jails in America. There's one candidate running for president, I don't know if you've heard of him, called Andrew Yang.
I've heard of him. People have said I should have him on the Glenn Show.
Oh, you should. He's brilliant.
Oh,
and
okay.
he says he's going to take, the day he's inaugurated, he's going to release all nonviolent drug offenders. I think it's drug. It might just be grasp. I think it's all nonviolent drug offenders from jail.
That doesn't sound like a very good idea to me.
Nonviolent ones?
Well, see, here's the thing. The thing is, people are imprisoned for a variety of different reasons. And one of them might be that they committed offenses that were not violent and they got caught. That doesn't mean that they are otherwise perfectly fine citizens. So if I take the population of people who are confined in prison, and it happens to be that they were confined for nonviolent offenses, in that population, there are going to be a lot of different kinds of people, and you just let one of them walk out of the prison and onto the street, and I'm not sure that's a good idea. That's all I'm saying.
No, point well taken. You always come up with ideas that I wouldn't have thought of. So that's a good point. However, he says a lot of other very interesting things. So
and it might be a good idea. I'm just not sure. Is all I'm saying. It seems to me.
But
just to wave that hand at nonviolence and then say we're done.
Yeah, point well taken. But to your point about is there a pipeline? No, that sounds too paranoid to me. People tend to do their best, even if they're terribly mistaken about what real problems are and so forth. So.
Now, let me. You remember Daniel Patrick Moynihan?
Vaguely, yeah.
The
I remember
U.S. Senator from New York. He had a phrase that he coined that's always stuck with me called "defining deviancy down." What he was saying was that the culture is becoming progressively more squalid in its willingness to accept certain patterns of behavior or certain kind of social outcomes or whatever. Disrespect for law would be one of them. Talking back to a teacher in the classroom, I mean, when I was a kid, that was just like completely out of bounds. I mean, not only would I get a punishment when I went home, I would feel badly about it, and I'd have very little reinforcement from the other kids who'd be staring and looking at me saying, "You're an asshole." So that has changed. That has changed a lot, and across the board, a lot of stuff has changed. It seems like like the culture has become progressively less able to affirm things that we know from tried and true human experience are essential to a well-functioning society. Do you agree with that? And if so, what patterns in the larger culture would you point your finger at as being implicated in undermining the effectiveness of educational institutions?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I believe that's happening, partly as a result of one of the most important technological advances in human history, which is contraception, which loosened the need for the nuclear family, and loosened freed women to have sex as non-consequentially as men did, and so forth. So the implications of this are very wide-ranging. Many of them good, many of them bad. Who was it who said that every solution brings in new problems? So I think the sexual and the cultural revolution of the 1960s has contributed in a negative way to many outcomes. I'm horrified. I'm old enough to be horrified by the kind of language I hear on the internet and so forth. To me, I love language, and I would only use bad words if I'm really angry. That's in my generation. I wasn't allowed. I never said bad words until I was in college. And I still think they're bad words.
I said that's so funny. It sounds so almost corny with respect.
It is. I realize it is. I'm an antique.
We're in the same generation. I know what you're talking about, but
but I think one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson, or the major reason why he's so popular, is that he says his message is one of personal responsibility, not of rights necessarily. Because I can see kids grow up with the idea that they have all these rights without the corollary of responsibility. I think you and I were raised in a generation where, rights entailed responsibilities. And we're not emphasizing that enough with children nowadays, and haven't for a long time. And certainly the kids I worked with weren't steeped in that ethos at all.
Do you think there's anything in the possibility of character education for young kids? That is an explicit program, like you have civics education, you try to teach them how to be citizens. You have character education, you try to teach them how to be decent human beings, how to be mentions.
I think we try that anyway, don't we? Isn't that sort of done in daily life? Certainly in the home, it's done as a rule.
No, I was talking about more formal within the schools, but it either is or is not done. I mean, it sounds to me like in some of the homes it's not done.
Maybe not. No, I've never thought about it, but it could be part of a civics program, or I don't know if you could have a whole curriculum based on character development.
Okay. Listen, we're running out of time. I want to ask you something about something that you wrote that really struck me. You were teaching, was it Washington Irving? It was Lower Manhattan. This is September 11, 2001. You hear planes flying low overhead, roaring cacophony, the sound. And they strike the World Trade Towers. When the students in the classroom, correct me if I say anything that is inaccurate, learn that this has been a terrorist attack, they cheer. Did I hear you correctly about that?
Yes, you did. Yeah. And then funny, on Twitter, not that I've watched it all an awful lot, but a couple of people have been horrified by that and don't believe me. Somebody with a pseudonym actually said that she was in that classroom and it was a lie. No, I'm afraid it wasn't a lie. It wasn't, maybe it wasn't everyone, but it was loud enough to, I remember a couple of kids getting out of their seats. In general, rejoicing is too strong a word, but kind of excitement and pleasure at the idea.
Wow. Well, you know why they have to say you're lying, because Donald Trump, at some point, if I'm not mistaken, alleged that there were Muslims in New Jersey who were cheering when they could see the World Trade Center. Now, I don't know if that's true or false. Let me presume it's false. It wouldn't be a surprise.
I think it's false. I believe it's false.
But your story is close enough to that story that people are going to want to resist it. That's
I'm afraid it happened that way.
Why? Why do you think it happened? What do you think it was emblematic of? What did that represent?
Because teenagers, they felt that maybe the World Trade Center to them also was a symbol of power, white power, capitalism, or whatever. I don't even know if it was racist. I'm not saying it was a racist thing, but it was. There is an idea that the wealthy people are just white. I've heard that even from people who should know better. I didn't even think about it that much. I was in such a state of shock, of course, not knowing where my family members were, not assuming they weren't there, and I was right. But it registered in my head. It was unforgettable.
They are so alienating.
Not everybody. It wasn't everybody in the class. No, the whole class didn't erupt. But there were enough kids who did that it was dismaying.
So alienating.
They were teenagers after all.
I say I'm trying to give some characterization of what I think I'm learning from you, that these kids are so in opposition to the mainstream and the establishment, feel themselves so marginalized and excluded, define themselves over and against, and the structures, the powers that be, white society, America. That when an event like this happens, they say, well, you guys are getting your comeuppance, as you say.
Yeah. Just like there are people who believe that 3,000 Jews didn't show up for work that day. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy things that people believe about 9/11. But this, I'm afraid it was a fact. It's a lamentable fact, but it's true. And it wasn't the worst thing that, but it was certainly an eye-opener for me.
I think it is, to the extent that it's true and that it's characteristic of something broader than just your particular experience. It's very bad news, even now, 18 years hence. Very bad news for American society. Very bad news. I mean, if there's not any countervailing message, let me just say this. If there's not somebody who points to this and says, no, come on, we're Americans here. I mean, you say you don't see race, and I believe that you don't see race, and this is not.
I do see race. I see race. I don't think it's necessarily the major.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. We have to teach these kids that they're Americans beyond the fact that they happen to have a certain pigmentation or come from a certain location.
I absolutely agree.
That's on us. That's on us. That's on us.
I agree, absolutely. And I think it's the fault of the liberal establishment who are teaching anti-American ideas. It's horrible to me. It becomes more and more explicit. You hear it all the time from perfectly wealthy white, liberals. I know enough of them. And there's anti-Americanism. And I said, well, do you know what it's like? You talk about the patriarchy? You want to go to a patriarchy, go to the Gulf states, go to North Africa. We do not have a patriarchy in America. But it's becoming terrifying, the attitudes on the left in the media and Hollywood and so forth. And it's anti-American, and I'm horrified by that. We can all criticize our country. Of course we should. There's lots to criticize.
Yeah.
But you're going to go live in, one of those countries? Do you want to go live in India? Do you want to go live in Tunisia? Even that's probably one of the best. But no, we have a lot better situation. We have many more democratic safeguards in America, and we really have to appreciate that. And it's a common problem on the left now to be anti-American. And that's insane. I agree with you.
Yeah, that's a subject for a much longer discussion. I think we're going to have to call it a day. I'm reminded.
I'm not really qualified to talk about it. In
this best-selling book of Ta-Nehisi Coates' "Between the World and Me," and he calls for reparations in another one of his pieces. But in the book, he talks about what happened on 9/11, and he's sitting there watching the towers collapse on the first responders who were inside. And he said he felt nothing for them, because he was so angry with America because it's such a racist society and so implacably to him.
Poor man.
But here's my point. My point is not about him as such, because that's not a uncommon view, okay? Both the idea that America owes African Americans reparations for slavery and Jim Crow, and the idea that America is a bankrupt state for which African Americans should have nothing but contempt. After all, the police officers shoot black people in the back when they're unarmed, et cetera, et cetera. The NFL athletes who are taking a knee during the anthem are doing it during the anthem and not at some other time, because they're not wanting to show respect to the country because they have a beef. But the idea that you want reparation on the one hand, but you also have contempt for a sense of common citizenship and a respect for the ultimate decency of the society that you're living in, notwithstanding its shortcomings. These are inconsistent ideas, because how are you going to persuade your fellow citizens to get behind what has to be done if you have contempt for them? And this especially, I think this applies in education. How are we going to get the reforms that are necessary, appropriate the resources that are required, redirect our institutions in such a manner as is required, if the political processes needed to accomplish that are awash in partisanship, are mired in a kind of, so we have to all get on the same page somehow. I know that's a lot more easily said than done, but it seems to me it's an absolute necessity.
I entirely agree.
That requires a change in the attitude of some African American leadership and intellectually
you can say that again.
Influential persons, but I think it also requires something of the mainstream society.
I entirely agree.
Okay, so we can end on a note of agreement.
Yes, we can. You're a tough interviewer.
Thanks very much, Mary Hudson, formerly of the New York City Public School System, for coming on the Glenn Show. A fan of the Glenn Show. I appreciate your tuning in. We'll talk again at some point.
Okay, great. All the best. Thanks a lot.